When I drove up that road, my father's forest wasn't there anymore, only smoke and the black frame of my house. I said that line once, years later, during a deposition. But it began on a cold October morning in 2019, halfway up Coldwater Ridge Road, the sun still pale behind the pines. I'd been out of town for 48 hours. A land surveyor doesn't get vacations, only gaps between deadlines, and this one had cost me 2 months of sleep. I remember thinking about breakfast, not disaster. The world still felt solid. Ordinary. Then I smelled it, wet ash riding the wind, drifting through my cracked window like a warning. The closer I drove, the thicker the scent grew. The forest thinned in uneven patches, branches stripped, needles curled into black claws. My tires rolled over cinders that had no business being on a mountain road after last night's drizzle. I slowed as the first chunk of charcoal slid under my wheel. I knew before I saw anything. Fire leaves a silence behind it, a silence that doesn't belong in a place that once breathed. I turned the last bend. Everything that had shaped my father's land, the old cabin, the tool shed he built in '92, the porch where he taught me how to read maps by lantern light, had collapsed into a skeleton of beams. Smoke curled from the heap in thin spirals, the kind that rise from a campfire long after the flames die. For a moment, I couldn't get out of the truck. Grief didn't hit me fast. It crept, like a rising shadow. I opened the door only when the wind pushed smoke straight into my face, forcing me to move. Boots sank into soggy ash. The ground felt wrong, soft in places it shouldn't be. I crouched and pressed a gloved hand against the soil. Even after rain, the heat lingered deep beneath the surface. A voice carried from the driveway. "Mr. Warren?" I straightened. Fire Marshal Halpern stood near the gate, clipboard in hand. His expression was stiff. Too stiff. I'd met him twice since moving back to Coldwater Ridge. A straight shooter normally. Not today. When did this happen? My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Early yesterday," he said. "Neighbor called it and around 5 a.m. crews contained it before it spread further uphill." I scanned the ground. "Cause?" He cleared his throat. "Still under investigation. Electrical's possible. Cabin was old. It wasn't faulty." I kept my tone level. "I rewired it myself last spring. Inspected and signed off." He didn't answer. He just shifted his gaze toward the road behind me, a hint I didn't miss. Someone had arrived. Marlene Huxley walked up the gravel like she owned the mountain. Tailored coat, spotless boots, hair pinned tighter than her smile. HOA president. Self-appointed queen of Coldwater Ridge. She carried a clipboard too, though hers had no soot on it. "I came as soon as I heard," she said. Her sympathy was thin, barely stretched over something sharper. "Terrible loss, truly." I nodded once. "How did you hear?" "A patrol alert." She gestured vaguely, though we had no patrol, only a hired security driver who clocked out at midnight. "We all want to support you during this unfortunate event." Halpern coughed softly. "I'll, finish the report. Be around if you need me." He moved off without meeting my eyes. Marlene stepped closer, scanning what remained of the cabin like she was appraising a damaged asset. "This might be an opportunity," she said. "For what?" I asked. "To clear and modernize the parcel. Bring it up to community standards." She didn't blink. "You know the board always had concerns about non-conforming structures." "My home wasn't non-conforming," I said quietly. "Well," she shrugged. "That can be revisited now." A gust blew smoke between us. She turned slightly, covering her nose with a handkerchief. "You should check your mailbox this evening," she added. "Board communication. Standard procedure." She left before I could ask what standard procedure meant. Her SUV rolled away without a patch of ash touching its tires. I walked the site alone after they left, measuring distances by instinct. Patterns become part of a surveyor's blood. The ground near the northwest corner showed a burn pattern too clean, almost directional. Rainfall should have muddied it, but the line stayed sharp. Accelerant often behaves that way. Halpern knew that. Yet he'd avoided stating the obvious. I circled the debris field and crouched near what used to be the entryway. Glass had melted into warped sheets. Metal hinges curled inward like someone had twisted them with force before the fire. The pine to the left of the porch was burned only at its base, not up the trunk. Fire climbs naturally. This one hadn't. My father's compass, the brass one he carried for 30 years, lay half buried in a pocket of ash. I lifted it carefully. The casing was scorched, but the needle still moved. A neighbor, Mark, approached from the ridge path. Mud on his jeans, eyes wide. "Elias, man, I'm sorry. We tried to call you. I thought the fire crew reached you." "They didn't," I said. "Did you see anything?" He hesitated. "I heard an engine around 3 in the morning. Thought it was wildlife officers. Didn't see lights." "Truck?" "ATV?" "Truck," he said. "Big one." A cold thread worked its way down my spine. He lowered his voice. "You know Marlene's been pushing for a road expansion behind your lot, right? Heard talk she was frustrated your land isn't on the market." "I'm aware." Mark exhaled, looked at the ruin again, then left with a sad nod. Once alone, I searched the perimeter. A faint tire track ran across the back edge of my land, half covered by ash but still visible. Too fresh for last week. Too deliberate to be random. I photographed it with my phone, then photographed everything else: soil, angles, tree damage, debris scatter. Old habit, document before conclusions. By late afternoon, the smoke had thinned. The air turned metallic, the kind of dryness that follows a storm and a tragedy. I drove down the mountain slowly, the compass resting in my jacket pocket. When I reached my mailbox at the subdivision entrance, a sealed white envelope waited. Return address, Coldwater Ridge HOA Compliance Office. Inside. Notice of violation, Code 14B, unmanaged debris and hazard conditions. Fine, $450. Date issued, 4 hours after the fire crew left. I stood there in the fading light, holding the paper that had more ink on it than sympathy. My house was still smoldering, and they'd already printed a fine. A steadiness settled into me at that moment, not anger, not shock. Something cleaner. Something that didn't shake. Grief is loud. Suspicion is quiet. I locked the notice in my glove compartment. If they were documenting things, then so would I. That's when I decided to document everything. The morning after the fire, I woke in a motel on Highway 14. The blanket smelled of detergent strong enough to sting, and my clothes still carried smoke no shower could erase. I lay still for a moment, listening to the hum of the heater. Grief pushes downward, but pressure pushes inward. I felt both. By 7 a.m., I was back on Coldwater Ridge Road. Fog clung low between the trees, turning the mountain into a quiet corridor. My property sat behind yellow tape, but the restriction didn't seem meant for me. It felt meant to prevent anyone else from seeing what the ground still revealed. A county vehicle was already parked near the gate. Deputy Clerk Harlan stood beside it, flipping through a folder. Thin man, nervous hands, reputation for losing documents whenever someone connected to the HOA needed him to. He barely looked up when I approached. "You Elias Warren?" he asked. "Yes." He held out a sheet. "We received a request to verify the chain of ownership for your parcel. Deed from 1987 isn't in the archive. Could be misfiled." His voice faltered. "Could be missing." "It wasn't missing last month," I said. "I had a certified copy." "Then you should provide that," he replied. "HOA is contesting non-compliant structures and easements. They need proof." "Who submitted the request?" He closed the folder. "Board President Huxley." Standard review. Nothing about this situation was standard. I took the paper and folded it once. Your office will get everything it needs in writing." He nodded quickly and left as though he'd stayed longer than he was supposed to. When the engine disappeared down the road, I walked my perimeter again. The ash had settled into thin gray layers, soft underfoot. Each step released a dull scent: charcoal, damp soil, faint chemical traces. The fire had stripped away the noise, leaving only details that couldn't be argued. By noon, the sun broke through. The heat felt sharper on exposed ground. That's when I saw a woman in a reflective vest walking slowly across my lot, making notes on a tablet. "Can I help you?" I asked. She turned. "HOA compliance inspection." "This is an active fire scene," I said. "Board authorized immediate review," she replied without blinking. "Your property currently violates debris management requirements." "My house burned down yesterday." "Yes, and the board expects cleanup within 72 hours. She snapped a photo of the ruins. "You'll receive notice soon." "You sent one already," I said. "Last night." "I don't handle delivery." She continued typing. "Who instructed you to be here?" She paused. "President Huxley." I held her gaze until she lowered her eyes. She left without another word. I stayed until the evening chill settled, memorizing the site 1 square foot at a time. When I finally drove down to town, the sky had drained to a pale blue, the kind that carries the weight of an unfinished day. My phone buzzed just outside the grocery store. "Unknown caller." I answered. "This is Elias." A clipped voice replied, "You failed to appear for your scheduled HOA meeting this afternoon." "I wasn't notified of any meeting." "Notice was posted on your property." "My property is a burn site." "Well, it's your responsibility to monitor updates," the voice said. "The board will forward minutes and any penalties." The call ended before I responded. That night, I spread every document I had across the motel table. My father's survey notes, the 1987 deed, tax records, HOA newsletters, emails, photographs of boundary markers, the violation notice issued hours after the fire. Patterns appeared the longer I stared: small, intentional misalignments. A false date here. A missing initial there. A signature placed too smoothly on a form supposedly filled out on the side of a mountain. Around midnight, exhaustion finally broke through the stubborn focus. I shut the folder and let my head rest on my arms. Anger didn't flare. It rarely did. Instead, a steady conviction formed, a quiet refusal to be pushed. Fear visits uninvited. I learned to let it sit, then show at the door. By the third day, pressure shifted into something sharper. A certified letter arrived at the motel. Inside. Final notice: failure to clean fire debris. Penalty: $900. Deadline: 48 hours. I drove straight to the HOA office, a log-sided building fashioned to look rustic but lined with security cameras. Inside, the air smelled like pine cleaner and staged hospitality. Marlene sat at her desk, posture immaculate. She didn't feign concern this time. "Mr. Warren," she said, "these fines aren't personal. They're procedural." "Nothing about this is procedural," I replied. She folded her hands. "You've always been independent. Difficult to coordinate with. The board is simply ensuring community standards. My house burned. Your board issued fines before the ashes cooled. Responsibility doesn't pause for tragedy," she said. "And neither does fraud," I answered. For a moment, her expression cracked, not fear, but irritation. Someone unused to being challenged. She leaned forward. "Elias, this land is part of a larger vision. A cohesive development. Your father resisted progress. You're repeating that mistake. It's my land. That's what the board is reviewing." I held her gaze. "My deed is valid." Her lips curved slightly. "We'll see." I left before saying anything I couldn't retract. Outside, cold wind cut across the lot. I steadied my breath and replayed her words. Threats sound different when wrapped in politeness, but they're still threats. The shift came that evening. I received a message from an unknown number. I can help. Meet tomorrow. Bring everything. Attached was a business card photo, Sandra Pike, attorney at law, Fort Collins. I considered ignoring it. Then I remembered the county clerk's shaky voice, the inspector's evasive eyes, the truck mark heard before dawn. Something larger was at work, and I couldn't fight shadows. The next morning, I met Sandra at a quiet booth in a diner off Route 287. She was direct, mid-40s, sharp eyes that noticed more than people meant to show. No small talk. Tell me everything, she said. I handed her the folder. She sifted through each sheet slowly, occasionally pausing to reread a line. When she reached the deed discrepancy, she exhaled softly. When she reached the compliance fines issued during an active fire scene, she shook her head. When she reached the forged signature on a delivery acknowledgement, she set the paper down flat. This isn't incompetence, she said. It's coordination. By who? Your HOA president, possibly more. And likely in connection with a development proposal. She tapped a page. They're manufacturing a paper trail to weaken your claim. I kept my voice steady. Can it be stopped? Yes, she said. But we need to move fast. Preservation requests, document demands, injunction options. I'll handle the legal strategy. You follow my instructions exactly. Tell me the first step. Start gathering original documents, she said. Every page your father kept. And photograph the fire site again. Angles, soil, debris, anything the marshal overlooked. I nodded. She slid the forged notice back toward me. There's fraud all over this. Her certainty didn't comfort me. It anchored me. For the first time since the fire, I felt a direction forming, not hope, not justice yet, but clarity. And clarity is the beginning of a reversal. The shift began quietly, the kind of shift you only recognize when you look back and realize the ground had already moved in your favor. The morning after meeting Sandra, I drove to my father's storage shed on the lower ridge. He'd built it from thick timber in the late 80s, long before the HOA existed. The padlock had rusted around the edges, but the key still fit. When the door creaked open, the familiar scent of old lumber and oil spread through the stale air. Inside, dust floated like slow snow in the sunlight. On the far shelf sat a metal box with a sticker he'd placed decades ago, "Survey records, do not discard." I carried it to the workbench and opened it. Inside. Original plats from 1987. Handwritten field notes. A boundary log signed by 2 now retired county surveyors. A tape reel of voice recordings. In a sealed envelope marked parcel corrections, important. I opened the envelope last. It held a detailed sketch of the northern boundary, the one the HOA kept claiming encroached on community land. My father had written at the bottom. Coordinates dispute anticipated. Retain originals. Accuracy verified. His foresight steadied me. This land had been his fight long before it became mine. With the documents secured, I drove straight to Sandra's office in Fort Collins. She met me at the door with a look that suggested she'd already been preparing motions since dawn. "Did you find anything?" she asked. I placed the box on her desk. "Enough to redraw the mountain." She opened the plats, tracing the lines with quick, practiced eyes. "These resolve the boundary dispute entirely," she said. "And the signatures, these are from licensed surveyors. This is gold." "What now?" I asked. "We file a quiet title action under Colorado Revised Statute 38-41-101, she said. "It freezes their ability to claim your land. They'll have to prove their case in court instead of on paper." "And the forged notices?" "I'll request the originals through a demand for production," she replied. "If they refuse, we move for sanctions." She leaned back, expression sharp. "This is no longer defense. It's counter-offense." That afternoon, we returned to my property to document the fire site again. The ash had dried into thin crusts that broke under each step. Sandra photographed burn angles, soil discoloration, and the tire track I'd found earlier. "Accelerant patterns," she murmured. "Notice how the heat concentrated here. Fire doesn't form edges like this in wind." "You think it was intentional?" I asked. "I think someone wanted you out," she said softly. "But they didn't expect you to respond like this." Her voice carried a certainty I wasn't used to hearing from anyone except my father. It steadied me in a way I hadn't expected. While she photographed the eastern edge, I dug gently through a pile near the cabin's old corner foundation. Beneath a warped sheet of metal, I found a cluster of nails fused together but untouched by electrical scorching, another sign the fire didn't start from faulty wiring. Sandra noticed. "Tag that," she said. "Chain of custody matters now." We spent hours gathering samples. Sunlight dimmed behind the ridge before we finished. "Tomorrow," she said as we packed equipment, "I'm filing 3 motions. After that, the board won't be able to touch your land." 3 days later, everything accelerated. I arrived at the county building expecting to submit a statement. Instead, the clerk handed me a stack of documents the HOA had filed the previous night. A new violation. A proposed lien. A claim that I had abandoned the property. All signed. All notarized. The notary stamp caught my eye first, the name Yvette Harmon. I recognized it immediately. She'd notarized my father's will in 2010. But something bothered me. On the drive back to town, I called the county recorder's office. "Can you tell me when Notary Harmon last renewed her commission?" I asked. The clerk paused. "Harmon? She passed away in 2016. Commission expired same year." The world narrowed into one clear line. Marlene forged a dead woman's signature. I parked outside the diner and called Sandra. She answered on the first ring. "Tell me," she said. "A lien notarized by someone who's been dead 8 years." Silence. Not hesitation, calculation. "That's the break we needed," she said. "Bring everything to my office. Now." When I arrived, she was already drafting motions. "This changes the tone of the case entirely," she said. "Forgery by an HOA official shifts liability to the board. Judges have no patience for falsified records. How soon can we use it?" I asked. "We file a motion to strike fraudulent documents," she said. "And an injunction to prevent construction or changes on your parcel. The court will demand they explain the notary discrepancy." She looked directly at me. "This is the turning point." For the first time since the fire, I felt something like relief. Not safety, not yet, but a recognizable direction. A path forward. The minor wins came quickly after that. First win. The court granted Sandra's injunction, halting all HOA activity on my land. Second win. The county clerk found the missing deed once we presented the originals. It had been misfiled. He didn't meet my eyes when he handed it back. Third win. The fire marshal responded to Sandra's supplemental inquiry. His report noted accelerant-like residue near the point of origin. No conclusions, but significant enough to raise questions. Fourth win. Marlene attempted to issue another fine. The judge suspended the board's enforcement authority pending the title case. Sandra looked at me that afternoon and said, "They expected you to fold in the first week." "I don't fold," I said. "I know," she replied. "That's why we're winning." The pretrial hearing date arrived faster than I expected. I sat outside the courtroom in the Larimer County Justice Center, the file in my hands heavy but steady. Voices echoed through the corridor, attorneys, clerks, people shifting their futures in small, nervous steps. Marlene arrived flanked by her attorney and 2 board members. Her coat looked more expensive than usual. Her confidence looked thinner. She walked past me without a word. But she smirked, a quick, practiced twitch. I didn't return it. Instead, I breathed in the faint scent of disinfectant and paper, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights above, the distant shuffle of jurors entering another room. This was no longer chaos. It was structure. Procedure. A language I could learn, one step at a time. Sandra walked out of the courtroom and handed me a copy of the judge's preliminary notes. He saw the forged signature, she said. He's not pleased. Good, I replied. She closed her briefcase. Elias, this is where pressure becomes leverage. From here on, patience wins. Her words settled deeper than she knew. Silence isn't surrender, it's preparation. I stood, straightened my jacket, and followed her into the courtroom. The reversal had begun. Courtrooms don't sound like television. They breathe. Carpets absorb footsteps, walls swallow whispers, and the air carries the dense quiet of people waiting for truth to surface. When I stepped inside Judge Moreno's courtroom, the atmosphere felt heavier than the mountain fog back home. Marlene sat at the defense table, posture sharp, jaw tight. Her attorney, Collins, shuffled papers with the confidence of someone used to controlling outcomes. Sandra stood beside me with a calm that didn't waver. The judge entered. Everyone rose. His gaze swept the room, not dramatic, just observant. He had the steady expression of someone who'd seen every kind of lie and every kind of truth. We sat. Case number 24-1917, he said. Warren versus Coldwater Ridge Homeowners Association. Sandra rose. Ready for the plaintiff. Collins echoed the same for the defense. Judge Moreno adjusted his glasses. Before opening statements, I want clarification regarding the notarized lien submitted by the HOA. The room shifted. Collins stood. Your Honor, that document reflects a standard claim. Stop. The judge's voice was calm but firm. The notary in question died in 2016. I want to hear how a deceased notary authenticated anything in 2024. Silence. Collins swallowed. We are still determining how that occurred. Determining? The judge lifted the page. This is a legal filing. It bears your client's signature. Marlene's fingers tightened around the pen on her table. She didn't speak. Sandra stepped forward. Your Honor, we contend the document was manufactured to pressure my client into surrendering his land. We will demonstrate a pattern of fraud across multiple filings. Proceed, he said. Sandra opened with precision. My client's home burned under suspicious conditions. Within hours, the HOA issued a violation. Within days, the board submitted documents with incorrect dates, missing records, and a fraudulent lien notarized by a deceased individual. These actions were not administrative errors. They were pressure tactics. She placed the original plats on the evidence table. These documents, preserved since 1987, confirm Mr. Warren's boundaries without question. Yet the HOA attempted to redraw those lines without review. She stepped back. This is a case about power used carelessly and property rights used as bargaining chips. Then Collins delivered his statement. It was polished, empty, wrapped in vague claims of community standards, miscommunication, and clerical oversight. He avoided specifics the way someone avoids broken glass. He ended with, the board acted in good faith. Sandra whispered to me, watch how fast that collapses. Our first witness was Fire Marshal Halpern. He looked uncomfortable sitting under the lights, but he answered every question. Marshal, Sandra said, did you find evidence inconsistent with an electrical fire? Yes, he said. Concentrated heat at ground level, unusual burn patterns, and residue suggesting a possible accelerant. Did you share these findings with the HOA? No. Did Mrs. Huxley ask for updates? Yes. She asked before the official report was finished. Yes. Marlene shifted slightly but stayed silent. When Collins cross-examined, Halpern stayed firm. Nothing in the cabin wiring suggested failure, he said. Nothing. The judge wrote something down. Next came the county clerk. His throat bobbed when Sandra handed him the forged lien. "Is this the notary stamp from your office?" she asked. "Yes." "And the notary died 8 years ago?" "Correct." "Could this document have been notarized legitimately?" "No." "Could it have been created without internal cooperation?" He hesitated. It would be difficult." "Difficult," she repeated, "or impossible?" He lowered his eyes. "Impossible." The courtroom murmured. The judge tapped his gavel once, quieting the room. Sandra then called me to the stand. I spoke calmly, the way my father once taught me to speak when describing a survey. Truth doesn't need volume, it needs clarity. I explained the fire discovery, the fines issued hours later, the boundary manipulation, the missing deed, and the notary discrepancy. I showed photographs of the burned site, the tire track, the debris patterns, and the forged acknowledgement signatures. When Collins cross-examined, he tried undermining my motives. "You were emotionally distressed," he said. "Isn't it possible you misinterpreted events?" "No," I said. I recognized a pattern. Not grief. Pattern. "You blame the HOA for your personal loss?" "I blame them for their actions." He leaned closer. "You believe Mrs. Huxley wants your land?" "I don't believe it." I tapped the plat. "I can trace every attempt on paper." Collins opened his mouth to press further, but Sandra objected. Sustained. The turning point came when Sandra called Dr. Lena Morales, a forensic document examiner. She testified with crisp exactness. She laid the forged lien under a projector. The signature ink is from a pen produced in 2021. The notary seal was digitally replicated from an older document. The pressure pattern indicates it was printed, not stamped. She circled a detail on the screen. This signature appears to have been traced. Collins stood. "Objection, speculation." She shook her head. "Not speculation. Measured analysis." The judge nodded. "Overruled." Then Sandra delivered the final blow. "Dr. Morales, could this document appear in a legitimate filing system without someone intentionally placing it there?" "No," she said. "Absolutely not." You could feel the silence tighten around Marlene like a closing hand. After testimony concluded, Sandra approached the podium for closing remarks. "They built homes on stolen ground," she said. "Mr. Warren built a case on truth." Her words didn't echo. They settled. Then Collins attempted damage control. He argued the board trusted outdated processes, that emotional intensity clouded interpretations, and that no one intentionally misled the plaintiff. But every sentence faltered under the weight of the evidence. When he finished, the judge leaned back, hands folded. "I've reviewed the documents," he said. "The inconsistencies are not administrative. They reflect intentional manipulation." He turned to Marlene. "As HOA president, you authorized filings you knew were incorrect. You approved a lien using a dead notary's seal. You pressured a homeowner grieving a recent loss. This conduct is unacceptable." He lifted his ruling. "Quiet title is granted to Mr. Warren. The fraudulent lien is void. The HOA will pay compensatory damages, civil penalties, and attorney fees. Personal sanctions apply to Mrs. Huxley for her direct involvement." Marlene's face drained of its careful composure. The judge's final words struck deeper than any blow. "Paper doesn't lie. People do." Gavel. One clean strike. Verdict delivered. Justice quiet, but absolute. Keep your receipts. The weeks after the verdict moved differently. The mountain felt wider, the air clearer. Pressure no longer pressed against the edges of my thoughts. Instead, a steady calm settled, the kind that comes only after truth leaves no loose ends. Coldwater Ridge thawed slowly that spring. Snow retreated first from the southern slopes, revealing patches of pine needles and stubborn roots. My land, once covered in ash, now held new shoots pushing through the dark soil. Life doesn't wait for permission. I parked at the base of the property one morning and stood for a long time before walking the path. The air carried a faint scent of sap and morning cold. A soft breeze moved through the trees that had survived the fire, stirring the branches in a slow, patient rhythm. The rebuild had already begun. Lumber waited in neat stacks. Survey stakes stood where the new cabin walls would rise. I'd chosen to rebuild exactly where my father's structure had stood, not out of nostalgia, but out of clarity. Some places earn their meaning. They don't relinquish it. As I approached the foundation outline, I saw a familiar figure standing near the edge. Sandra. She held a thermos in one hand, a folder tucked under her arm. "You're early," I said. "Habit," she replied. "Lawyers wake with the sun. Problems do too." She handed me the thermos. "Coffee, strong and clean. Thought you'd need this." I nodded. "How's the settlement phase?" "Efficient," she said. "The new board doesn't want to fight. They're cooperating with every request." "Good." She studied the land for a moment. "You're rebuilding exactly?" "Closest I can," I said. "Foundations change. Memory doesn't." She smiled slightly. "Your father would approve." I didn't answer immediately. The wind carried the faint sound of a woodpecker further upslope. A rhythmic tapping, steady and unhurried. "Maybe," I said. He understood persistence. Sandra exhaled. "You did everything right, Elias. Most people would have walked away." "I know," I said. "But this place, it isn't just acreage. It's a promise." She nodded and placed the folder on a beam. "Your case will deter anyone who tries something similar. The precedent matters." I looked at the folder before her hand left it. "What's that?" "Final reimbursement forms," she said. "Once signed, the HOA pays out damages." Her expression softened. "You earned every dollar." Money had never been the point, but justice often arrives with paperwork. I signed without hesitation. After she left, the land grew quiet again. A deeper quiet, one that didn't hide danger. Only truth. I spent the following days clearing debris. Not with machines. By hand. Some people asked why. I didn't explain. Work clarifies thought. Ash brushed away one handful at a time turns the past from a wound into a record. On the fourth morning, I found the piece I didn't expect, my father's compass casing, the one I'd set aside after the fire. It had been cleaned by rain and time. The needle still floated steady. I held it for a moment, turning it in the sunlight. The metal warmed in my palm. It pointed north. Not symbolic. Just true. I placed it on a new shelf in a temporary shed. One day, it would sit in a glass case inside the rebuilt cabin. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. Some ground isn't inherited. It's defended. The community shifted too. With the old board removed, meetings turned transparent. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to before now approached with quiet apologies. Many admitted they hadn't understood Marlene's reach, how she manipulated records, steered votes, intimidated residents who resisted her vision. One evening, Mark, the neighbor who'd heard the truck the night of the fire, stopped by while I was stacking planks. "You holding up?" he asked. "I'm steady," I said. He nodded. "Good. We elected a new president. She wants to invite you to a meeting." Just a gesture. "Maybe," I replied. "You didn't deserve any of this," he said softly. "I know," I answered. "But recognizing wrong doesn't fix it. Doing the work does." He left with a wave, and I returned to sorting lumber. The sound of the mountains settled around me, the low hum of wind, distant runoff from melting snow, and the steady thud of wood landing in place. Each noise felt clean. Spring thickened into early summer. The risers of the new cabin took shape. Walls climbed one board at a time. I worked alone most days, not because I lacked help, but because I needed the silence. The mountain had carried chaos long enough. It deserved quiet construction. One evening, as dusk pulled shadows across the ridge, I placed the final beam of the main frame. The wood slid into position with a solid, satisfying click. The sound carried through the clearing like a soft declaration. This place lives again. I sat on a stump and watched the last of the light fade behind the ridge. The air cooled. Pine resin drifted faintly on the breeze. Somewhere down the slope, a fox barked once, quick and sharp. For the first time since the fire, I allowed the stillness to fill me. Justice doesn't shout. It settles. Later that night, I walked the boundary lines with a lantern. The old survey markers my father had placed decades ago were still there, worn, leaning slightly, but holding their place. I touched each one as I passed, a silent acknowledgement to the work that came before me. When I reached the northern edge, the lantern cast a soft glow over the new metal stakes Sandra's office helped install. Fresh paint, precise measurements, documented in court records and sealed in official archives. No one would challenge them again. I turned back toward the cabin structure. The outline stood strong in the moonlight, new timber, clean lines, a foundation anchored not just in concrete but in truth. A quiet satisfaction settled in my chest. Not triumph. Something steadier. Closure. I walked to the temporary shelf in the shed and took the compass. Holding it under the moonlight, I felt the weight of everything that had happened, the fire, the fraud, the hearings, the verdict, the rebuild. It all led here. A single point on a map. My father once told me, land doesn't belong to you unless you stand for it. He was right. And now, as I sit on the new porch frame, I want to speak directly, the way I would if this were a camera instead of an empty mountain. If you've ever faced a corrupt HOA, a dishonest board, a fraud that hid behind polite smiles, you're not alone. These battles are quiet, but they're real. Tell me your story in the comments. And remember, keep your receipts. Paper doesn't lie. People do. The cabin stood quiet in the morning light, its unfinished frame outlined against a pale sky. The air carried a thin chill, the kind that comes before a clear day in the mountains. I sat on the new porch beam with a cup of coffee and watched the mist pull away from the treetops. The mountain wasn't restless anymore. It felt like it was listening. I thought the verdict had closed the chapter entirely. But justice has a strange way of leaving echoes, events that rise later, soft at first, then unmistakable. I learned that lesson in the weeks after rebuilding began. One of those echoes arrived in the form of a letter. It was delivered by hand, not mail. A plain white envelope, no seal, no stamp. I found it wedged between two boards near my tool bag late one afternoon. At first I thought it was trash blown from a passing truck. But the name written on it in neat pencil stopped me. Elias Warren. I opened it slowly. Inside, a single sheet torn from a spiral notebook. I have something you need to see. Meet me behind the maintenance shed at the old trailhead. Come alone. No signature. No date. The handwriting was small, tight, rushed. I read it twice, then slipped it into my jacket pocket. I finished cleaning up before sundown, locked the tools away, and headed toward the old trail system above the subdivision. As I drove, the ridge darkened. Shadows moved between trees, long and thin. The trailhead lot was empty except for the maintenance shed, a weathered structure built when the community was first developed. Its metal siding glowed faintly under the moon. I parked and stepped out. Elias, a voice whispered from behind the shed. A figure emerged, a man in a worn jacket, hands shoved deep in his pockets. When he stepped into the moonlight, I recognized him. Harlan, the county deputy clerk. He looked older than he had in the courtroom. His shoulders slumped, and his eyes carried a quiet guilt. "You left that note?" I asked. He nodded. "Didn't want cameras seeing anyone come to the office." "Why meet at night?" He swallowed hard. "Because I'm risking my job. Maybe more." I waited without speaking. Silence can draw out truth better than questions. He took a shaky breath. There's something you don't know about the fire. My pulse tightened, but I kept my voice calm. Tell me. You weren't the only one pressured, he said. Marlene had connections inside the county offices. She wanted your records flagged long before the fire. She said your land was misallocated. But she didn't stop there. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket. This holds emails between her, Collins, and 2 county staff members. Discussions about adjusting property lines. Suggestions to review your deed for discrepancies. One message even mentioned alternative methods if you didn't comply. The night felt colder instantly. Alternative methods? I repeated. His voice dropped. She meant the fire. I didn't believe it then. I thought it was just talk. But, after the trial, I kept thinking. So I checked old access logs. Someone inside our office pulled your permit records the night before the fire. Someone with override credentials. And you're giving this to me because... He looked down. Because I helped bury part of the deed request. I didn't know how deep it ran. But I knew enough. And I should have stopped it. You should have, I said. Not harshly, just truthfully. He nodded. I know. What do you want from me? Nothing, he said. Just, use this. Make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. He stepped back, hesitant, then added, be careful. There are still people who don't want this scene. I watched him walk into the darkness until the sound of his footsteps faded entirely. The next morning, I drove to Sandra's office. She opened the door before I knocked twice. You look unsettled, she said. I have reason to be. I handed her the flash drive. She didn't speak while loading the files. Her expression shifted from curiosity to calculation to a cold, controlled anger. When she finished reading, she shut the laptop firmly. This isn't just misconduct, she said. It's criminal conspiracy. What do we do? We file, she replied. This time it won't be civil. This is criminal jurisdiction, fraud, evidence tampering, public office abuse, possibly arson conspiracy depending on how the marshal correlates the timeline. She leaned forward. And we don't wait. Do you trust Harlan? I asked. I trust what he gave you, she said. People lie. Data doesn't. Her words echoed the judge's ruling, the way truth echoed through the ridge. I nodded. Tell me where to start. Give a formal statement, she said. Then let the state handle the rest. You've done enough fighting alone. The investigation unfolded quietly. Officials from outside the county arrived with questions sharper than any cross-examination. They collected devices, seized records, and interviewed people who once brushed off concerns. The ridge felt different during those weeks, unsettled, but in a way that meant something dormant was waking. Marlene was nowhere to be seen. Her house sat dark most evenings. Rumors spread through the community. She'd fled to Denver, she was negotiating, she was hiding. None of it mattered anymore. The system she manipulated now turned its gaze on her. One afternoon, I returned from the lumber yard to find a message on my phone. A clipped voice, official tone. Mr. Warren, this is Special Investigator Clark. We wanted to inform you that Mrs. Huxley has been taken into custody on charges related to the documents you submitted. I played the message twice. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like completion. Weeks later, when my cabin frame finally held its roof, I stood inside the skeleton of the new living room. Sunlight filtered through the unfinished walls, drawing long stripes across the floorboards. I sat slowly, letting the silence settle. No courtrooms. No violations. No forged claims. Just timber, sunlight, and a ridge learning to breathe again. A soft knock came from outside. I stepped onto the porch beam. A woman in a red parka stood near the path, the new HOA president. Younger, calm, steady-eyed. Mr. Warren, she said, I wanted to thank you. For what? For forcing all this into the open, she replied. This community needed accountability. You showed us what it looks like. I nodded once. Take care of the place. That's all I ask. We will, she said. The board won't forget what happened. She left the way she came, quiet, respectful, leaving no trace in the soft dirt. As dusk lowered, I walked to the highest point of my land. From there, the valley spread out in muted colors, the ridge curling gently toward the west. The cabin behind me glowed faintly as the remaining sunlight brushed its beams. I pulled my father's compass from my pocket. The needle steadied, pointing north, unbothered by everything that had unfolded. I closed my hand around it. This place wasn't just protected now, it was proven. And for the first time since the fire, I felt something deeper than relief. Continuity. The past had tried to disappear. But the truth held. If someone had been filming, I would have said the same thing I said at the end of every chapter of this story. Have you faced a corrupt HOA? Leave your story below. And remember, keep your receipts. And under my breath, one more line meant for the mountain alone. Paper doesn't lie. People do.